Good morning, this is your Stat Sensei, Mr. Spensei, and this is a video on bias. This will be multiple choice, 20 questions, and look forward to going through this with you. A survey is conducted by randomly selected phone numbers from a landline telephone directory. What type of bias is most likely to affect the results? All right, so first off, we have randomization. If it's randomization is involved, it can't be voluntary response bias. Okay. Um, Response bias, so it can't be that because in voluntary response bias, people chose to respond. You put a number out on the television and people called in or something like that. Response bias, it's either a sensitive question or a poorly worded question. We don't know anything about the question type, so no wording of the question is involved, so that gets rid of that one. All right, the next thing, under coverage bias. Um, and non-response bias. Non-response bias is when we have people not responding. We really don't have that information, so this one cannot be non-response bias. Under coverage bias means we are not able to reach everybody. How many people do you know that still use a landline telephone as their main communication? Most of us are using cell phones. So this would be a case of under coverage bias because it's unlikely that we are using a landline phone line. And by the way, under coverage bias and selection bias, which will be another type of bias, are very, very similar. You will never have a multiple choice question where it'll have both answers. It'll either say under coverage or it'll say selection bias because under coverage bias and selection bias are too similar to distinguish. So under coverage, and I'm going to put a slash selection bias because they mean almost the same thing. They're so close we can't distinguish between them. But this one, number one, is under coverage bias. All right, a radio show asks listeners to call in and give their opinions on a new law. What type of bias might affect the results of the survey? Well, who's going to call in? The only people who are going to call in are those who care a whole lot. So those with strong opinions or those with weak opinions. I mean, those strong opinions one way or another. Oh, they love the new law. This is the greatest thing ever. Or they hate the new law. It's awful. So in this case, it's those with not strong opinions, and there was no randomness involved. No randomness, people self-selected, no randomness and self-selected. And what I mean by self-selected is they chose to call in. No one contacted them. They weren't randomly selected. They're the ones who cared enough to call in. All right. That's always going to be a case of voluntary response bias. No randomness. And they self selected. They chose to participate even though they were never selected or asked to. Number three, a survey asked participants to report how many hours they exercise each week. Some participants may exaggerate their response. Gosh, why would you exaggerate your response? Well, you want to act like you're being healthy. You want to act like you're working out 5 times a week when you're really never working out 5 times a month. Okay. So, what type of bias is this? Well, um, because that question is somewhat sensitive, all right, what am I being a healthy person or unhealthy? And that's a sensitive question. That's going to be a case of response bias because it's when response bias occurs when it's either a sensitive question and we might lie about it or exaggerate or not tell the truth, or the question is worded very poorly. So, number four, a study on the effectiveness of a new drug only includes participants who are already visiting the hospital. What type of bias is most likely present? So, a new drug includes participants who are already visiting the hospital. Well, does that represent the entire population? And the answer is, well, no, it doesn't. So, in this case, we're not representing the entire population. So, my immediate thing is under coverage bias. As I mentioned earlier, under coverage bias and selection bias are extremely similar, and they'll never have both answers. In this case, we don't see under coverage bias, so selection bias. because we're selecting from not the entire population. We're only selecting from those who are already visiting the hospital. What about those who are not visiting the hospital? Would the new drug work for them, or does it only work for this specific group? We really don't know because we didn't select the entire population. So it's a case of undercoverage bias or selection bias. Those words are pretty much synonymous and will never show up on the same set of answers. Number 5, a survey is mailed to 1,000 households, but only 200 respond. Ooh, we send it out to a lot of people. It kind of reminds me of the PTA packets that you got at the beginning of the year. How many of you have returned those things back? Not many. So when people if they're randomly selected but failed to respond, that is non-response bias because you were contacted, you had the opportunity, but you chose not to respond. So you're randomly selected and chose not to respond. That's non-response bias. Number 6, a researcher conducts a survey about interest usage by visiting only urban areas and excluding rural areas. What type of bias is this? Well, guess what? It's undercoverage bias again. Why? We excluded a group, we left them off. Excluding a group in some way or another, accidental or intentional, is undercoverage bias. So once again, remember, undercoverage bias and selection bias are very similar, and you will not have those two answer choices occur on the same problem. So this could have been selection bias. It also could be undercoverage bias. Either way would have been correct. Okay, an online poll asked visitors to a news website whether they support particular candidate. The results are most likely to be influenced by. Well, is there randomness here? Who's going to respond to those polls? I mean, I'm sure you've seen them. Do you like Donald Trump or don't you like Donald Trump? Please respond to this poll. I love Donald Trump. He's the most incredible individual I've ever seen. Best president ever. Someone else. He's the orange devil. All right. So you have those on both ends are the ones who respond. The ones in the middle, meh, I don't care. I don't care enough to respond. I'm not very political, whatever. You're wasting my time. I'm not responding. So that's who responds, is those with strong opinions. And because there is no randomness and you self-selected, so no randomness and self-select, that's a case of voluntary response bias. All right. In a face-to-face interview, a respondent might provide answers they believe the interview wants to hear. This is an example of, ooh, the interview wants to hear. In other words, not necessarily telling the whole truth. Why? Because I'm afraid of the consequence. All of us have been guilty of non-response bias. I mean, guilty of response bias at some point. When your parents asked you, did you do your homework? Did you make your bed? Did you clean your room? The answer is, well, yes, even if you've sort of barely started, or maybe you thought about starting, but you haven't done it yet. We don't always tell the truth. When we're not telling the truth, this is a case of response bias. So response bias is not telling the whole truth or lying or having a poorly worded question. Number 9, a researcher is studying dietary habits but only includes participants who regularly visit a gym. What type of bias is this? Well, I don't regularly visit the gym. Of course, that's probably physically obvious, but that means, did I represent the entire population? No, I only represented primarily healthy people or people who care about health. I didn't represent the non-healthy. So if I miss a part of the population, if there's a part of the population I skip, then this is under coverage bias, which is the same as selection bias. All right, so under coverage bias and selection bias, almost essentially the same. Number 10, a telephone survey on environmental issues receives responses from only 10% of the population. I called 1,000 people, only 100 responded. Not responding. It says non-response. Maybe we should call it not response or no response. It's like when I get something in the mail that I don't want to answer, it just goes in the trash. As far as I'm concerned, this is essentially my spam message. No, I'm not interested in talking to you. A political survey conducted only in high income neighborhoods may lead to, well, gosh, I didn't get low income, I didn't get middle class income. So that means I've left out part of the population. When we leave out part of the population, we're going to have a bias because we didn't represent it, because we didn't cover the entire population. So not covering the entire population is under coverage bias, or as I said before, selection bias. Number 12, a magazine invites its readers to fill out a survey about their favorite products. The results are likely to be influenced by, if I hang out with my friends, we all like pretty much the same thing, right? Well, my readers, aren't they going to pretty much like the same things too? Because it's the same type of, it's like, hey, who buys this magazine? We, if it's a car magazine, it's people who like cars. It's a health magazine, it's health or photography. So in this case, we're not going to cover the entire population. We're only covering the type of people who like my magazine, who like cars, or health. So this is selection bias or under coverage because I did not cover the entire population. Okay, number 13. A questionnaire asks participants if they have ever engaged in illegal activities. Of course not. Never. Why would I have engaged in a illegal activity? I don't think you'd ever. I mean, I'm surprised you even asked me. I mean, that person down the street that I hang out with, sometimes they do, but not me. So this is a case where they asked me a sensitive question and I would be inclined not to tell you the truth. All right. Um, so may not answer truthfully. So this is a case of response bias where it's either poorly worded or we have a sensitive question and I might be inclined to lie a little bit. Okay. All right. Because I want to avoid the consequences of whatever the truth might be. Number 14. A researcher is studying job satisfaction but only surveys employees from a single company. Well, did I cover all the companies? And the answer is no. If you didn't cover all the companies, then you're going to have undercoverage bias. So this is a case of, and I look for the word undercoverage bias, I don't see it, so it must be selection bias because undercoverage bias and selection bias, undercoverage and selection are essentially the same thing. An election poll is conducted, but many respondents refuse to participate. Ooh, refuse to participate. No response. That's non-response bias. Boom, just that easy. All right, 16. A health survey conducted at a local gym might result in, well, if I'm doing it at a local gym, I'm going to overrepresent health nuts, underrepresent the rest of the entire population. Or so underrepresent is undercoverage bias, also selection bias, because I only represented those who go to the gym. I didn't represent those who don't. A television show asks viewers to text their votes for their favorite contestant. The resulting votes are likely affected by who even responds to that. Okay, I know people watch America's Idol or whatever. The people who do that have what? They either love someone or they hate someone, but they're voluntarily calling in because not everyone does. So they're voluntarily calling in, and usually they're the ones that, oh, this is the greatest guy. Oh, this is the greatest girl, or they're horrible. They're the worst, whatever. But the ones that are like, meh, they're okay. That's uh, they don't respond. But regardless, in this case, this is voluntary response bias because they chose to call in or text in and there was no randomness. All right, number 18. A survey asked people how often they recycle. Some respondents might overstate. Another word of saying might overstate as lie. Why? Because I want to look environmentally friendly. I don't want to look like an eco-terrorist. So in this case, or in, um, I want to look good, so I'm going to lie. If I'm likely to lie in response, this is response bias because the question was sensitive or the question was worded poorly. Either one of those choices. Number 19. A study on eating habits only includes participants from a vegetarian community. Uh, only includes. That means I'm leaving out the rest of the population who love meat, like myself. So this might result in undercoverage bias. I don't see the word undercoverage, but I see selection bias, and by now I know that those mean the same thing. Finally, number 20. A mailed survey about financial investments receives responses from only a small percentage. Oh, we're only getting responses, so we have non-response or no response from a lot. So when we have that, we have non-response bias. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, non-response bias because we only received it from a small percentage. All right. So the answer to number 20 is B. I hope this helped on bias, and I hope you won't be biased. I hope you will randomly select when you carry out a survey. And good luck on this topic. Talk to you later. Thank you.